Hello everyone, this is Zero Strain. Now, Zero Strain is actually made by the same guy that developed a game by the name of Hangeki quite a while back, which was a really cool sort of very weapon-focused vertical scrolling shoot-'em-up that I covered way back near the time that it released, sort of-ish, because I had never really heard of it before, and I thought it was a shame that I'd never actually heard of it until then, because it was really cool. And I'd never really played any shmup that was quite like that one. And, well, he seems to have kind of done it again. In this case, he has said that he's sort of taken all that he learned from the creation of that game and its reception and went to do a little bit something different. And Zero Strain is, as he describes it on the page, a sort of MOBA-like, mechanically speaking, shoot-'em-up, by which I believe he's talking about the fact that every single sort of ship that you can have, which are called catalysts in this game, has a very specific set of skills. Yes, a very specific set of skills, and they all play in quite different ways, and will need a very different playstyle to sort of master them, and they even have a sort of out of 3 difficulty ranking that tells you the sort of general complexity of the mechanics and playstyle that you're going to be expected to use if you want to master that particular catalyst. And they do actually feel very much like MOBA-style kits. Now, the game is not a MOBA in any way. It's not trying to be that, but it's simply that it was clearly a big influence for how the catalysts themselves are individually designed. And a bit more on that later. But first of all, you may notice in the background that it's really frantic, it's incredibly fast, it's just very stressful to play, and I mean that in a good way. It is definitely very high speed, and you need to be pretty much constantly moving. There is very little in the way of a break in the general level structure of the game. There are different sorts of game modes that the levels will actually take place in, but they all have the same thing in common in that they are very fast and expect quite a lot of focus from you. The game also has a very a nice looking kind of geometric art style, I would call it. It's very sort of like flat shaded and polygonal. It looks really neat, actually. Very like digital looking, I suppose you could say. And it pulls off the whole like almost fractal looking, like being inside of a computer kind of theme is how it reminds me of. And pretty much everything is actually in that art style. Of course, the catalysts that you actually command, as well as the levels themselves, the platforms that you're on, and all the enemies and bosses are all in this art style, and the enemies themselves come in pretty much all shapes and sizes, everything from just small swarming enemies that are just sort of meant to overwhelm you with numbers rather than specific strategy, to like large turrets that have different tells of how they're going to fire, so you need to actually pay attention to them to be able to avoid their attacks, to much larger and more complicated enemies, lots of enemies that can only be damaged from certain angles, for instance. That's a very common theme. A lot of enemies have weak points that are like on their sides or on their back or something like that, and you'll need to watch for their attack, dodge it, and then counter now that their weak point is exposed to actually destroy them, which is simple enough in theory, but because of the very frantic nature of the game and how many enemies are actually going to be paired against you, that can actually be really difficult. And just as a whole, I would have to say that the game is seriously quite hard. It is really hard, actually. There are many levels that I've had to try over and over again to actually beat, but it has never felt unfairly hard, in my opinion. Every time I have lost, I have known why, like where I screwed up and what I need to do next time to see if I can do better. And a lot of the boss fights, like the one in the background here, are very much about learning that kind of thing. Like, for instance, you'll see those right there, those timed purple orbs on the ground. You have to dash into them to destroy them, and if you don't, it will put a very long-lasting ring of damage on the ground that you cannot go into. And of course, given the size of the other attacks that this particular boss likes to throw at you, limiting the amount of space that you have before you can get damaged in order to avoid those attacks is very, very bad. So you need to be able to track those down and destroy them before they appear, or before they trigger, I suppose you could say. And that's actually just a similar way to how all of the bosses work in this game. It's that it's very much sort of a trial and error learning kind of phase. For the first couple of tries, you may be able to beat them on your first try, you never know. If you're like a particularly fast-minded, I suppose you could say, and you kind of you fall into the rhythm of what to do. Some of them are a bit easier to take on for the first try. Some of them will probably take multiple tries because they just have a lot of mechanics to throw at you, and you gotta have a little bit of time to learn them. But the common theme between the bosses is they have quite a bit of mechanical complexity, you could say. They have a lot of different, I guess, phases, or otherwise just a large number of different attacks that they can throw at you that you'll have to learn how to dodge or otherwise not be in the way of. And as far as dodging goes, you do actually have a dodge in this game, which is pretty cool, because not a lot of shmups actually do have like dodging mechanics. You're more supposed to dodge things by moving out of the way rather than actually having a specific dodge button. But in this case, you actually do. You have a boost button. Just tapping it will make you dodge out of the way, and the dodge does have immunity frames, so you can use it to dodge through attacks if you time it correctly, although repeated dodges in quick succession will reduce the amount of immunity frames that you get each time, so you can't just constantly do it. And if you hold the button, you actually boost around, which can be useful for covering larger distances in some of the more open arenas to get to something that you need to destroy quickly, because a lot of things have specific timings and things like that. You know, enemies that have very certain firing arcs and very certain tells and telegraphs to their attacks that you have to be aware of. And that is kind of interesting because it means that your focus is basically deliberately split constantly throughout the arenas. Your focus is split between paying attention to your actual ship to try and avoid anything that's near you and to see where you're aiming and things like that. Also between things on the ground, like the sort of large red circles and the like that tell you that there's an attack coming that way and you need to not be there. And also on certain enemies, because certain enemies, although they do have attack tells, they are not in the form of red spots on the ground. They are instead in the form of like red flashes and other things, and like, you know, beams charging up and stuff that you can visually track on the individual enemy. So you're constantly looking all around the arenas trying to just not get killed. Basically, you can actually die very quickly in this game. Even the tankier catalysts have a limitation in terms of how much damage they can take, and you can actually take damage very quickly because there doesn't seem to be like a sort of mercy immunity that I can tell. I could be wrong, it might just be very short. But from what I can tell, it's very easy to get hit rapidly in succession if you don't move in time. And so that's actually where a large portion of the difficulty actually comes from, is, you know, learning all of the enemy patterns, their attacks, their weak spots, and when you can actually access them easier in combination with what other enemies are going to be in the groups of that enemy and things like that. It's, I guess, kind of like Serious Sam, actually. You know, you have enemies with very specific rules, and you have to understand how they will interact with each other and what you can do to not get horribly stopped while facing them. And it all culminates in moments like that that are extremely satisfying, where you actually manage to get a 100% clear rating and like a full chain combo, where you actually manage to complete the level without ever dropping your chain, without getting health damage put on you, and just sort of dodging all around the place and never actually dropping that combo. And that is extremely satisfying to do, although, of course, it's weird. It's kind of like those moments where you just really get in the zone and you sort of forget about everything around you for a minute, and you just sort of are 100% completely focused on what you're doing, and you just sort of tap into it. It's a neat feeling. I guess it's kind of similar to things like when people post all those like full combos on Guitar Hero and things like that, where they just sort of like zone out from everything except for what they're doing, and they manage to do some pretty neat stuff, very satisfying as a result. And this game does have that feeling. The progression of the game itself is stage-based. You will be choosing from different stages as you go along the game, and each one will give you a power. It's a sort of, the game runs off of a power system where you are trying to power up the station that you're on, sort of repair it, basically. And different stages, as well as different catalysts that you can unlock, require different thresholds of power, and every time you clear a stage for the first time with one of the catalysts, you will get one of these, whether it be a boss battle or a descend stage, which is one of these, where you just kind of keep going down and down towards the end with increasingly difficult waves of enemies on these cool little platforms, to other things like, for instance, protection stages, where you'll have a sort of central node to protect that all of the enemies will be spawning in to attack, and you have to actually defend it until all the waves are gone. Those are pretty challenging, by the way, but a lot of fun, because they are usually very wide open and have lots of different structured enemy waves to actually learn how to best effectively. The catalysts themselves they feel very different from each other. They have, of course, I mentioned the whole MOBA aspect in terms of how they are sort of built, and that is very true. They all have a weapon, a sort of just primary weapon that they fire that all works differently from the other ones. They all have a passive that generally works with their kit in a specific way. It kind of synergizes with what else they can do. And they all also have 3 special weapons. These special weapons are charged by just time, by actually firing your main weapon and doing damage, and by collecting all of these various bits of energy that the enemies drop when destroyed. And if you dash near them, you actually sort of vacuum all of them in. So there's a bit of extra strategy there for that. And every one of these catalysts works extremely differently. As I mentioned, they have that, like, how many diamonds out of 3 kind of difficulty gauge that allows you to see the general complexity of how you're sort of expected to use them. And this one right here in particular, even though I don't do very well with it in this match because this is the first time I ever used it, has become kind of my favorite of the ones I have unlocked so far. It's called the Quantum Alchemist, and it very much reminds me of certain MOBA characters that have like a very specific skill set that is based around like one main gimmick and then applying that gimmick in multiple ways. Kind of like Invoker from Dota 2, I suppose you could say, how his main gimmick is all those elemental orbs that he can summon, and summoning them in different amounts gives him different spells, and the difficulty in him is actually learning what spells are triggered when and how. This is a similar idea. It uses these orbs that you throw out, and all of its attacks actually use those orbs. So you can just toss them out, which will do a bit of damage to everything in front of you. You can pull all of them towards you, so that everything in between where you are and where they are will get damaged, because it will pull them towards you and they become projectiles temporarily, to things like the ulti of the particular catalyst here that makes it to where it sort of releases a shockwave, and any of these orbs that the shockwave touches will become homing projectiles and fire out towards nearby enemies. So you have a sort of a system where you set up large sort of traps of these orbs and then pull them all through large enemy groups, doing huge like area damage, and it's just really satisfying to use. Every catalyst also has a different sort of energy economy, where your dashes and boosts will take a different amount of energy, as well as your actual main weapon. The special weapons do not take energy. It's part of their sort of appeal. And you have to find the balance between how much energy you can actually consume without running out and being helpless for a minute. And different catalysts have very different answers to that problem, which is pretty cool because it makes them all play quite differently. And I do definitely like the differences, the overall variety and actual play styles that the different catalysts offer, and I'm always excited to get a new one to see what it's like. The fact that the game actually rewards you for replaying older levels with newer catalysts kind of says all that needs to be said about how the game is actually sort of structured, how it's meant to work. You're meant to just play around with a variety and see what fits for you and what you have fun with in different kinds of levels. And it's very sort of open feeling and a lot of fun because of the idea that it actually allows you to go back at any time and play any level you want with any catalyst you currently have, therefore just allowing you to sort of practice with them, or maybe just try a different way to beat a level with a completely different playstyle. So that's definitely pretty cool. This game will be coming out on June the 20th, so it's not currently out yet, but it will be soon, and I think that it's got some really cool aspects behind it. I think it's definitely a lot of fun. It's just a sort of like frantic, fractal-based frag-fest, we'll say. The added alliterative appeal there, and it's just a ton of fun to dash all around these arenas and destroy everything to a pretty cool soundtrack, and some very nice sound design in general that makes a lot of the weapons and enemy attacks and like a very chunky feeling because of the nice sort of bassy, huge sounds that happen when you actually destroy things. So yeah, that is Zero Strain. It's definitely something to look forward to, and if you are interested in it, one thing you can do to both help yourself out in terms of the release date and help out the developer in terms of attention is to actually wishlist the game on Steam in order to get news of when it's coming out and things like that. So if you do feel interested in it and want to keep an eye on it, do actually do that, because it does help. So that is Zero Strain, everyone. Thank you very, very much for watching, and any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. I'll see you guys next time.